I was a jerk. I was a jerk. I was a jerk. And then I had to realize after going to the hole, fighting with the guards, going the hole, I understand there has to be a better way. But when I went to the hospital, the people that were there, they're up there because their kids are dead too, or about to die. So, who the hell am I? Their kids are dying too.
They called him Iron Mike, the immortal warrior of boxing, the most notorious nightmare in the history of sports. Mike Tyson, he didn't just fight, he redefined fear. But even legends have moments when they fall. Behind the lights and the cheers, Iron Mike was no longer a god, but a torn, lonely, broken soul. The man who once earned more than $300 million, lived among diamonds, and kept white Bengal tigers, would one day struggle just to pay his bills. The man once celebrated by the entire world spent countless nights crying alone in the dark until he could barely breathe. From the youngest heavyweight champion in boxing history, Mike Tyson became a prisoner, a bankrupt man, a father who lost his child. He had once stood at the very top of the world, only to plunge straight into the abyss of loss, loneliness, and regret. That fall didn't just take away his fame, his money, or his freedom, it tore apart the soul of a legend. At 59, Mike Tyson is no longer the warrior who made the world tremble. He is a living tragedy, a reminder that even the strongest man on earth can be defeated by life itself. From the time he was a child, life had already been hitting Mike Tyson with punches far crueler than any opponent ever could. His childhood didn't raise a boy, it created a monster. Brownsville, Brooklyn in the late 1960s, a place of decaying buildings and police sirens wailing like the familiar music of the slums. And in that place, a child was born. Michael Gerard Tyson on June 30th, 1966. His mother, Lorna Tyson, was a poor woman, and his father had disappeared before Mike could even say the word Dad. There were no fairy tales in Mike's childhood, only hunger violence and tears. He lived in a cramped apartment so small that every night the three of them had to sleep side by side under a dim yellow light. His mother Lorna, worn down by unpaid bills and endless drinking, was drowning in exhaustion and despair. Little Mike, short, stuttering, painfully shy, became an easy target for the street kids. They shoved him, stole his food, threw rocks at him, and called him dummy. He never fought back. He just covered his head, cried, and waited for the violence to pass. Until one afternoon, fate took a turn. An older boy, just for fun, strangled Mike's pet pigeon and threw it to the ground. For a few seconds, Mike stood frozen, and then something inside him snapped. He lunged forward and started throwing punches again and again. It was the first time the world saw the wild animal inside Mike Tyson, and the first time he ever felt strong. From that moment, he learned a harsh truth in this world. You either make people fear you, or you get buried. So he started fighting anyone who dared to look at him the wrong way. Brooklyn taught him the law of survival. There are no heroes, only survivors. And in that dark corner, where a lonely boy lifted his head, after that first punch, the little monster of Brooklyn Mike Tyson was born. At 11, Mike began stealing bread. At 12, he was snatching bikes, beating people up, and running from the police across rooftops. The Brownsville cops knew his face well. They called him a dangerous kid. By 13, his criminal record was as thick as a school report card, 38 arrests. Every time he stood in juvenile court, he just bowed his head and stayed silent, his eyes cold and blank. His mother, in despair, could only cry. Mike Tyson was sent to the Tryon School for Boys, a reform school for juvenile offenders in Johnstown, New York. But there behind bars and hopelessness, fate opened a door for a legend to walk through. The fateful encounter. Cus D'Amato, the man who saw a genius. Inside a monster. Tryon School for Boys. 1978, cold, silent, filled with young faces the world had already forgotten. Mike was 13, withdrawn, quiet, ready to hit anyone who came too close. To the guards, he was nothing more than a repeat offender, waiting to grow up and go to real prison. But among those files, one man saw something different. Bobby Stewart, a former amateur boxer who once represented the New York Police Department. Stewart saw Mike fighting in the yard. Short punches, explosive power, impossible speed. He pulled the boy out of the chaos and asked, "Where'd you learn to fight like that?" Mike smirked and said, "On the streets, places you wouldn't dare go." Stewart laughed, then handed him an old pair of gloves. "If you're going to fight," he said, "you might as well do it right." Within weeks, he was stunned. The 13-year-old had the reflexes of a predator, a 200-pound punch, and eyes so cold they seemed untouched by pain. Stewart knew this kid was born for something far beyond street fights. So he called an old friend, Cus D'Amato, the legendary trainer who had once molded world champion Floyd Patterson. "Cus," he said, "I've got a boy. No father, no direction, just anger in his heart. But if anyone can save him, it's you." By then, Cus was old and living in Catskill, New York, with his lifelong companion, Camille Ewald. The house doubled as a gym, old and creaky, but Cus's eyes still burned like steel. He agreed to meet the dangerous boy. The first day Mike walked into Cus's home, he said nothing. From then on, Cus didn't just teach him how to punch, he taught him how to live like a warrior. The opponent doesn't fall because of your punch, Cus told him. He falls because he was already afraid of you before it landed. Mike began training in the peekaboo-style, fast, relentless counterattacks, 6 hours a day. Hundreds of punches repeated until his body and fear became one. But Cus was more than a trainer. He was the father Mike had never had. Cus and Camille took him in. For the first time, Mike had a real home, a hot meal, and someone who believed he deserved to be loved. Cus called him son. Mike called him dad. Years later, Tyson said Cus saw something in me I couldn't see in myself, a champion. And when he believed it, I started believing too. But fate, as always, was never kind. Cus's lungs weakened from cancer. Every morning, he still sat by the ring watching every punch Mike threw. In 1985, when Mike was just 19, Cus passed away. Tyson sat beside the coffin, tears falling onto an old pair of gloves. Cus D'Amato was gone, leaving the world a warrior, but leaving Mike Tyson an orphan once more. The Rise, 1986, 1988. When the Beast devoured the world. At 19, Mike Tyson, the boy once dismissed as Brooklyn Street trash, stepped into the professional ring for the first time. Between 1985 and 1986, he fought 15 matches and won them all by knockout. The press called him the Steel Cyclone from the hell of Catskill. One by one, every fighter who had laughed at that short, fat kid from Brooklyn fell at his feet. Boxing arenas shook. Every time Mike Tyson entered the ring, people didn't see a 20-year-old. They saw Cus D'Amato, reborn, calm, cold, unblinking, moving like a machine. In November 1986 in Las Vegas, Mike faced Trevor Berbick for the WBC Heavyweight Championship. The arena was packed. Most thought it was just a test for the young man. But after only 2 rounds, Berbick was finished, dropped 3 times by the same final punch. At 20, Mike Tyson became the youngest heavyweight champion in boxing history. From that moment, the world changed. Iron Mike was born. In 1987, Tyson crushed James Bone Crusher, Smith Tony Tucker, and Pinklin Thomas, unifying all 3 major titles, WBC, WBA, and IBF. He became the first undisputed heavyweight champion of the modern era. No one could touch him. One reporter wrote, "Tyson doesn't step into the ring to fight, he steps in to punish." In 1988, Mike Tyson faced Michael Spinks, the undefeated Olympic champion the world believed could finally stop the Steel Storm. The fight was billed as Clash for the Crown. Tickets sold out CNN broadcast live worldwide. But the match lasted only 91 seconds. One right hook, Spinks collapsed motionless, and Tyson stood amid smoke lights and roaring crowds. In that instant, Mike Tyson stood on top of the world. No rivals, no equals. No one dared look him in the eye. After becoming undisputed champion in 1987, money poured into Tyson's life like a flood. Sponsorships, TV deals, licensing rights, media appearances, all revolved around one name, Iron Mike. Tyson lived like a god, an icon of strength, wealth, and desire. The lavish life of the boxing pharaoh. By 1988, Tyson's annual income had soared past $60 million, an unimaginable number at the time. And he spent it as if tomorrow would never come. People said that whenever he went out, he carried at least $10,000 in cash just to throw around for fun. He hosted wild parties in Las Vegas that lasted until sunrise champagne, flowing like rivers, dozens of women lining up for the VIP room while he tossed money like confetti. Once he paid $50,000 for a single gold-plated ostrich feather. Another time, he handed a Rolls-Royce Corniche to a stranger, simply because the guy had a smile I liked. Tyson bought 20 luxury cars at once and often forgot where he parked them. His massive garage looked like a museum of extravagance. Ferrari Testarossa, Lamborghini, Countach, Bentley Continental, Rolls-Royce Corniche, even gold-plated Cadillacs, more than 30 in total. No two with the same license plate. At his mansion in Ohio, what he called the Warrior's Palace, Tyson built enclosures for his Bengal tigers, 2 of them white, each worth nearly $70,000. He would walk them in the yard and let them sleep near his bedroom. That room, they said, was over 4,000 square feet, carpeted in white, with a huge oil painting of himself, knocking out Trevor Berbick. His custom-made bed was gold-plated, carved with hammers and boxing gloves. On his nightstand sat diamond-studded Rolex watches, thick gold chains, and piles of cash scattered like magazines. The media called him the Emperor of Boxing. Newspapers wrote, "The boy from the Brooklyn slums now lives like a pharaoh with gold tigers and a kingdom named Mike Tyson." At 21, Tyson had everything: homes, cars, money, fame, women. Every punch he threw didn't just knock out opponents, it shook pop culture itself. Hollywood wanted him in films. Fashion houses offered millions for him to wear their clothes just once. At 21, Mike Tyson was richer than imagination, yet slowly losing himself. Glory, absolute glory, turned out to be nothing but a cold, empty room. From heaven to the edge of the abyss. When Cus D'Amato died, he left behind a Mike Tyson perfected in strength, but not yet taught how to live outside the ring. With no one to guide him, Mike became surrounded by flatterers, agents, and opportunists who only saw dollar signs. He drowned himself in parties, alcohol, and sleepless nights. Mike Tyson was still the invincible god of boxing. But no one knew, even as the world cheered, the tragedy had already begun. The legend falls in Tokyo and descends into hell. February 11, 1990. Mike Tyson, 23 years old, had held the heavyweight title for 4 consecutive years. He stepped into the ring to face James "Buster" Douglas, a name almost no one knew. The odds were 42-1. Everyone thought it would be a warm-up fight before Tyson met Evander Holyfield. But by then, Mike had already forgotten much of what Cus had taught him: focus, discipline, humility. The night before the fight in Tokyo, he drank, laughed, and partied with friends, then slept only a few hours before stepping into the ring. The next morning, Tyson entered the arena, like a king drunk on victory, not realizing he was about to lose everything. Across the ring stood James "Buster" Douglas, nearly unknown, heartbroken over his mother's death just weeks earlier, fighting with grief and desperate determination. In the 10th round, Douglas unleashed the perfect combination: left jab, uppercut, 2 right crosses. Tyson staggered, his mouthpiece flew out, and he fell to the canvas. The referee began to count. Tyson tried to crawl up, trembling as he reached for the mouthpiece, but his legs wouldn't obey. When the count reached 10, Tokyo fell silent. Iron Mike, the symbol of power and fear, lay motionless under the lights. The legend had fallen. When a legend collapses, the media turns bloodthirsty. And instead of finding himself again, Tyson plunged straight into a whirlpool of sin, like a chained beast gone wild. Scandal, the shadows, that devoured a legend. The broken marriage, with Robin Givens. In February 1988, Mike Tyson married Robin Givens, the young star of the sitcom Head of the Class. America saw them as the new power couple. He was the world champion, she was Hollywood's rising beauty. The press called them Beauty and the Beast. But within 6 months, the fairy tale turned into a nightmare. Givens described Tyson as a violent man prone to fits of rage, unable to control himself. In the infamous ABC 2020 interview in September 1988, she sat beside her husband, voice trembling. "Living with Mike is like living on the edge. He's aggressive, unpredictable, and I'm scared every night when I go to sleep." Tyson sat next to her in silence, expression blank, as if he didn't understand what was happening. America was stunned. The image of Iron Mike, the unstoppable warrior, suddenly turned into that of an abusive husband. Weeks later, Robin Givens filed for divorce. In her petition, she accused Tyson of repeated physical assaults and threats against her and her mother. She claimed they once hid inside a closet to escape his rage. Police in New Jersey confirmed they were called to Tyson's mansion on October 2, 1988, after neighbors reported screaming and smashing sounds. When officers arrived, furniture was destroyed, glass shattered across the floor. Overnight, the man once hailed as Black America's pride became a symbol of violence and loss of control. Givens demanded half of Tyson's fortune, worth over $50 million at the time. Tyson went berserk. He accused her of marrying for money, claiming she faked a pregnancy to trap him. Newspapers called it the most expensive divorce in sports history. Tyson spiraled into rage. Once he smashed the window of her car and threatened her bodyguard. Another time, he stormed into Givens's office, throwing furniture and shouting until police intervened. After the marriage collapsed, Tyson completely lost control. He drowned himself in endless nights of alcohol, women violence, and loneliness. His manager said Mike lived as if every day was the end of the world. He didn't sleep, didn't rest, just partied and burned through his anger. But that wildness had a price. Tyson faced multiple lawsuits for assaulting a limousine driver, a photographer, casino staff, even throwing furniture in hotels. The press called him Hollywood's ticking time bomb. He jumped from one short affair to another, surrounded by models, singers, even political figures. The once golden image of a legend was now in shreds. Then came the summer of 1991, when the world thought Tyson couldn't fall any lower. The unthinkable happened. The lightning strike of 1991, the Desiree Washington case. On July 19th, at the Canterbury Hotel in Indianapolis, Mike Tyson was accused of assaulting 18-year-old Desiree Washington, a contestant in the Miss Black America pageant. According to her testimony, Washington agreed to go to Tyson's hotel room just to talk after a party. Minutes later, she fled in tears, claiming he had attacked her. The story exploded across America. Iron Mike, once the pride of Black America, was now being called a monster. News outlets swarmed the hotel, interviewing witnesses, digging into every detail. A New York paper screamed the headline, "From heavyweight to handcuffs." Tyson denied all charges, insisting it was consensual. But the public had already turned its back. Dozens of sponsors cut ties, HBO pulled its broadcasts, and people who once called him king now stayed silent, or worse, disowned him. The trial began in January 1992, one of the most watched in U.S. history. Inside the courtroom, Tyson was no longer a champion, just a defendant, head bowed, eyes cold, hands cuffed. Desiree Washington took the stand in tears, recounting every detail. The whole nation watched the man who had once conquered the world being crushed in front of them. On February 10th, 1992, the verdict was announced. Mike Tyson is guilty, 6 years in prison, 4 years probation. When the gavel struck, Tyson said nothing. He stood, glanced around the courtroom, his face empty. The image of Mike Tyson in handcuffs, head lowered, became the symbol of a fallen god. The warrior was gone. Only a 25-year-old man remained stripped of everything: fame, money, freedom, and the world's faith. Sports writer Larry Merchant wrote Tyson wasn't knocked out by an opponent. He was knocked out by the rage and loneliness no one ever taught him to escape. The former champion was sent to the Indiana Youth Center, a medium-security prison for young offenders. There, Mike Tyson was no longer Iron Mike, just inmate number 9222335. On his first day, he was strip-searched, his belongings taken and locked in a 2.5-square-meter cell. 3 years in prison became 3 years of destruction and rebirth. Inside, Tyson devoured hundreds of books from Mao Zedong to Marcus Aurelius. He studied philosophy, war history, and religion. Every day he trained for hours, punching concrete walls until his knuckles bled. During this time, Tyson converted to Islam, taking the name Malik Abdul Aziz, a desperate attempt to find himself again. When he was released in March 1995, he was 29, but his eyes looked twice that age. He walked out of prison with a stain that could never be erased. To the world outside, he was no longer a champion, only a legend tarnished by his own shadow. The comeback legend, or just a shadow. After his release from prison, Mike Tyson was determined to return to the ring, but paradise had changed color. In August 1995, the Las Vegas arena was packed. The marquee flashed a familiar name: the return of Iron Mike. His opponent was Peter McNeely, a little-known fighter remembered mainly as the first man to face Tyson after prison. The fight lasted just 89 seconds. McNeely went down after 2 sledgehammer hooks. The arena exploded. Fans screamed like crazy. The media called it the greatest comeback in modern sports. Tyson, the recently freed prisoner, was hailed as a hero again. Advertisers returned money poured in, and millions of dollars flooded his accounts. He went on to defeat Buster Mathis Jr., Frank Bruno, and Bruce Seldon in turn, as if to say Iron Mike wasn't dead. By 1996, Tyson had reclaimed the WBC and WBA belts. At 30, he was back on top of the world. But that glory was as fragile as smoke. Because the next opponent, Evander Holyfield, wasn't just stronger, he was steadier. Holyfield, a nightmare. Named the Saint, November 9, 1996, at the MGM Grand Las Vegas. The whole world watched Holyfield versus Tyson, a clash of 2 legends, technique versus instinct. Holyfield, once written off as past his prime, now stood before Tyson with an icy gaze. The fight went 11 rounds. Tyson fought ferociously, but Holyfield stayed upright. When the final bell rang, Evander Holyfield won by TKO. Iron Mike lowered his head for the first time in years. People thought he would stop. But just a year later, Mike Tyson returned to the ring. And that return opened the door to a fateful fight, where a legend was crushed by his own glory. 1997, the Bite Fight, when the beast devoured itself. The night of June 28, 1997, Las Vegas MGM Grand Garden Arena was packed to the rafters. Millions around the world were glued to their screens. Everyone waited for the rematch between 2 names that had become boxing lore: Evander Holyfield, the man of God, a symbol of faith and discipline, and Mike Tyson, Iron Mike, a living nightmare, newly out of prison, a 2-belt champion again, with the fire of a man trying to redeem himself with blood. Midway through the 3rd round, after Holyfield pinned him in the corner, Tyson snapped and bit his opponent's ear. The arena shook. Fans screamed, bottles flew, police moved in. Referee Mills Lane stopped the fight immediately. Holyfield clutched his bleeding ear while Tyson yelled from the ring, "He was headbutting me." He cheated. Cameras fired non-stop. Images of Tyson having his gloves removed and being escorted away became among the most humiliating in sports history. The Nevada State Athletic Commission fined him $3 million, revoked his license for a year, and left the most dazzling career on earth hanging by a thread. The Los Angeles Times wrote, "From immortal champion Mike Tyson has become a warning to us all. A man who cannot control his rage will ultimately be devoured by it." In 1997, Mike Tyson didn't just lose a fight, he lost himself. The halo was gone. Only jeers remained. Fans who had worshipped Iron Mike turned away, and the media called him a beast without reason. Everything Cus D'Amato had taught discipline, self-control, pride had dissolved. After the Bite Fight, Mike Tyson was no longer a boxing legend. He was a human tragedy. His life began to plunge fast. The fall of fortune. When the god lost all his gold. There was a time when Mike Tyson lived like a golden god among mortals. From 1986 into the early 2000s, Tyson made more than $300 million, a colossal sum, roughly equal to nearly $700 million today. People called him the Emperor of Las Vegas. He once hired dedicated keepers for 2 white Bengal tigers at $125,000 a year, fed them raw beef, and gave them their own air-conditioned room. He spent around $500,000 a month just to maintain a retinue of bodyguards, servants, drivers, and people. No one remembered what they did. And hundreds of thousands per night on parties with friends, the kind who never stayed until dawn. Tyson's Connecticut mansion, over 50,000 square feet, had its own theater stables, a shark tank, and even a garden reserved for the tiger symbols of power and excess. But no kingdom survives if the emperor isn't sober. Cus D'Amato was gone, the only mentor who ever taught him about honor. In his place stood Don King Boxing's infamous vertical hair kingpin with a beaming smile and contracts thick as scripture. For more than a decade, Don King drew over $100 million from Tyson through murky fees, advisor fees, special intermediary fees, for things no one could quite define. Tyson signed everything. He trusted King. He trusted everyone because deep down being loved mattered more to him than being protected. By the time he realized it, it was too late. Once in a rage, Tyson punched Don King in the face and screamed, "You took everything from me!" "You snake," King only smiled. "Mike, you can't hit the man who made you." Bitter as it was, he wasn't wrong. As the new century dawned, Tyson was no longer Iron Mike, but a living emblem of decline. His body was wrecked, his reputation stained, but his spending stayed wild. He burned through more than $400,000 a month on cars, women booze, and parties that never ended. Tax debts, lawsuits, legal fees, and management costs piled up. By 2003, Tyson owed $27 million. The IRS began to seize assets. Banks froze accounts and friends vanished. The Connecticut mansion. Mike Tyson's golden fortress was sealed. A man who had been a king could only sit and watch everything he owned disappear piece by piece. On August 9, 2003, Mike Tyson officially filed for bankruptcy in Manhattan Federal Court. He had just $685,000 in assets and $27 million in liabilities. The New York Times ran a photo of him with his head bowed in court under a headline as cold as Ice Iron Mike, the king who sold his crown. Bankruptcy didn't kill Mike Tyson. It stripped him bare. With no money, no empire, no spotlight, he began showing up at small boxing exhibitions, comedy gigs, and cheap commercials. The man who once made the world hold its breath with every punch now stood on stage forcing a smile for the camera in exchange for a few $1,000s. Iron Mike, the god of power and blood, finally had to kneel to learn how to be a man. And just when he thought he had suffered enough, fate still wouldn't let go. The death of Exodus 2009. When a god lost his little girl. May 2009. Under the dry Arizona sun, Mike Tyson was in Las Vegas, preparing to film his reality show Taking on Tyson. He didn't know that within hours the universe would rip everything away. On May 26, 2009, in Tyson's home in Phoenix, Arizona, his 4-year-old daughter, Exodus Tyson, curly hair, wide eyes, a mirror image of her father, was playing alone in the family gym. On a treadmill, a cord from the handlebar hung loosely near the floor. Only a few minutes passed. When her mother, Sol Xochitl, walked in, she found her daughter lying motionless, her neck caught in the cord. Her 7-year-old brother ran in and tried to help untangle it. The mother held Exodus in her arms, screaming for help as paramedics broke through the door. They tried to revive her, but the little girl's heart had stopped. When Tyson's phone rang, he was at the Ritz-Carlton in Las Vegas. He thought it was a minor accident, but when he heard the words critical condition, his world froze. Without a second thought, he boarded his private jet and flew straight to Phoenix. The flight took 45 minutes, but for Tyson, it felt like 45 years. When he arrived at St. Joseph's Hospital, the white hallway was as silent as a graveyard. The man who had once made the world tremble, who had dropped 44 men with his fists, collapsed to his knees, holding his daughter's body, weeping without sound. The news stunned the nation. From CNN to ESPN, every headline read, "Mike Tyson's daughter, 4 dies in tragic treadmill accident." Even his harshest critics fell silent. No one could laugh at the image of the fallen giant now hunched in grief before his child's coffin. After Exodus's death, Tyson disappeared. For months, he didn't appear in public, didn't train, didn't speak, didn't sleep. A wedding in the shadow of death. Just 11 days after burying his daughter, Mike Tyson quietly married Lakeha Kiki Spicer, the woman who had stood beside him through his darkest years. The ceremony was small, silent, held in Las Vegas. No cameras, no reporters. Just 2 people and a grief too deep for words. Many said he married too soon, barely 10 days after his daughter's passing. But for Tyson, it wasn't romance, it was survival. "If I didn't marry her," he said, "I would have died." Kiki became his anchor to reality, the only woman brave enough to face his rage, his tears, his nightmares. She, along with their 2 children, Milan and Morocco, gave Tyson a new reason to live. Yet Exodus remained the deepest scar of his life. Tyson began to abandon alcohol, drugs, and violence. He turned to veganism, meditation, and raising pigeons, the only gentle creatures that brought him peace. The death of Exodus was the final knockout of his life, the one blow no fighter could dodge. It shattered what remained of the beast inside him, leaving only a man weak, remorseful, but real. Rebirth, 2012-2020, when a legend rose from the ashes. After his daughter's passing, Mike Tyson vanished from the world for nearly 3 years. But as all legends do, he didn't stay down. He rose, returning to the truth. In 2012, Tyson collaborated with director Spike Lee on Mike Tyson: Undisputed Truth, a one-man stage show where he stood alone under the spotlight, telling his entire life story. The poverty, Cus D'Amato prison scandals, loss and guilt. It was just Mike Tyson, trembling, choking sometimes, laughing bitterly, sometimes crying for real in front of hundreds of people. The show was a public autopsy of the soul. Audiences didn't come to cheer. They came to witness a man strip himself bare. For the first time in decades, Mike Tyson left the stage not to booze, but to empathy. After the show's success, Tyson published his memoir, Undisputed Truth, in 2013. It wasn't self-glorifying. It was a confession. The words of a man who had touched bottom. The book became a global bestseller, not because Tyson was a boxing legend, but because readers saw a man who hurt, who sinned, and who sought redemption. After Undisputed Truth, Tyson slowly transformed. No longer Iron Mike, no longer the monster, he became a streetwise philosopher, a survivor of everything. He spoke to students, former inmates, and the lost. "I used to be the king of the world," he said. "Then I became a beggar. Now I just want to teach people not to repeat my mistakes." He spoke of faith, karma, and forgiveness. Hotboxing with Mike Tyson, the medicine for the soul. In 2019, Tyson launched the podcast Hotboxing with Mike Tyson, where he talked with artists, athletes, rappers, even ex-convicts. No scripts, no hosts, just Tyson and raw truth. Each episode felt like therapy, not only for the guests, but for him. Sometimes he cried, remembering Cuss, remembering Exodus. The podcast drew hundreds of millions of views, not because of fame, but because it was brutally honest. Tyson once said, "My biggest enemy isn't Douglas or Holyfield, it's Mike Tyson." From fists to light, Tyson no longer chased victory. He sought peace. The man who once wore diamonds now wore wooden beads. The man who once lived in a 50,000 square foot mansion now lived quietly with his wife and children in a modest home in Nevada. Every morning he meditated for 20 minutes. No longer Iron Mike, just Mike Tyson, a man repaying his past through kindness. Old age and the final challenge. 2024, 2025. By 2024, the world saw him as a distant memory. But then Tyson announced his return to the ring to face Jake Paul, the 27-year-old YouTube star shaking up modern boxing. The news exploded. A clash of generations, they called it, between an immortal icon and a digital age provocateur. Once again, the world spoke his name. No one knew whether it was madness or a miracle, but fate struck again. In July 2024, Tyson was rushed to the hospital for a gastric hemorrhage. Doctors warned him to stop. "Your body can't take this anymore." The fight was postponed to November 2024. At 59, while most of his peers were resting in nostalgia, Mike Tyson still trained every day. Not to win, but to prove to himself that tragedy couldn't kill him. If life itself is a boxing ring, Mike Tyson is the man who fell 100 times, but never stayed down. He never defeated time or destiny, but he conquered the darkness within his own soul. Mike Tyson, a tragedy beyond endurance, yet an immortal legend forged from scars.
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast. There is still so much more to explore. Stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now appearing on your screen.